This is Chapter 2, Organizational Demands and Environmental Influences. In this chapter, we'll talk about company strategy, company characteristics, organizational culture, employee concerns, and how they affect HR activities. We'll also discuss labor force trends, technology, managing employees in a global context, and how ethics and social responsibility affect managerial decisions. This chapter focuses on how environmental influences and organizational demands affect primary HR activities. When we think about what affects organizational demands, there are four things the book highlights. First, there's the organization's strategy, then there's the organization's characteristics, then there's a culture of the organization, and finally we can think about employee concerns. In terms of strategy, remember when we think about business strategy, the strategy represents the integrated and coordinated commitments and actions that are intended to achieve a stated business goal. Another way to think about that is that strategy answers the questions, what is our business, who is our customer, what is the value to the customer, and what should or can our business be. When we think about strategy, we can think about what is it the organization is attempting to achieve. For example, our book discusses two corporate strategies that an organization may engage in. One is a cost leadership strategy, in which the organization attempts to provide a service at the cheapest cost. Another is a differentiation strategy, in which an organization attempts to provide something unique to the customers. Depending on the organization, if an organization is very focused on cost leadership and reducing costs, they may engage in HR activities that are designed to reduce the cost of employees, reduce the cost of benefits, and keep the workplace as efficient as possible. Or an organization that's more focused on differentiation, on the other hand, may focus on activities that lead employees to be more satisfied or more diversely skilled, and may have hiring practices to promote hiring people who bring differentiation to the workplace. So again, the type of strategy the organization uses may affect the kind of HR practices the organization engages in. As we think about business strategy, we'll talk about how that affects the primary HR activities. Second thing to consider in terms of demands on the organization are the company's characteristics. How large is the company? And relatedly, how many resources are available to HR? If it's a small company, there may not be very many resources available. Whoever is working as a human resource manager may have a variety of tasks and activities they have to perform, whereas a larger company may have a lot of people who work in HR doing a lot of different activities and may have many resources to devote to those activities. We can also think about the company's life cycle and stage. Well, where is the organization currently? Is it a new organization, or is it an organization that's been around a long time? Are there policies in place, or do those policies need to be designed? Of course, we can also think about the company's success. Is it successful and needs to maintain its success, or is it not successful currently and needs to modify its strategies to be more successful? The organization's life cycle usually follows a path of starting as a startup, then experiencing, hopefully, growth, then developing into maturity, and then eventually declining or transitioning into another organization. Think about from organizations that are in the startup section would be organizations that don't have policies in place, for in which someone in HR may have a lot of leeway to design those kinds of policies or procedures. Whereas a more mature organization would probably have policies in place that the HR representative would be tasked with maintaining or improving. We'll also talk about company culture. When we think about the company culture, think about how organizations have shared values, assumptions, and norms that shape the socialization activities, the language people use, the symbols they use, and the ceremonies they use. Again, when you think about company culture, think about two organizations that may have the exact same purpose, the exact same goals, but may be very different places to work. Universities, for example, have very different cultures as well. The culture at St. Mary's is very different than the culture of Texas A&M or UT Austin or all those different places. Even though they're all universities, they have a very different culture. They have different symbols that you see around campus. They may have different values, different norms of behavior, and ways people are expected to act can be very different. And companies can have those kinds of cultural values, norms, and assumptions as well. Finally, we can think about the employee concerns. For your particular organization, what are their concerns of the people who work there? Again, are they single parents? Are they dual careers? What are the topics that they're concerned about? And the concerns of the employees will usually be things that the HR manager will be tasked to address. Relatedly, we can think about do the individuals who work there feel that the organization is just or demonstrates procedural justice? When we think about procedural justice, we'll think about is the organization applying their procedures in a fair way to all individuals? Individuals tend to think that they work at a place that's fair, again, treats everyone equally, applies their procedures fairly across different employees. If they see consistency in how the policies are enforced across employees, if they feel like the managers engage in bias suppression, if they feel like the decisions are accurate, if they're correctable, if managers feel like are willing to be corrected, if they feel represented, and if they feel like the organization's ethical. If we have those foundations in place, individuals usually feel that they work at a place that is fair in the policies and how they're applied. And when we think about beyond organizational demands, also just environmental influences too. We can talk about how environmental influences affect HR. When we talk about environmental influences, we'll focus on labor force trends, technology, globalization, and ethics and social responsibility. There are many labor force trends that organizations need to consider. There's increasing diversity in terms of race, gender, and age. We anticipate women will grow to be a larger portion of the workforce going forward. We anticipate greater representation for Hispanics and Asians and other minority groups. Probably most dramatically, we expect a dramatic change in terms of the age diversity we see in the workforce. The percentage of individuals in the workforce who are 55 or older is growing dramatically. And whereas the workforce used to be fairly uniform in terms of the age distribution, we're going to see a lot more diversity in terms of age as 18-year-olds enter the workforce and people 55 and 65 remain in the workforce for longer periods of time. Beyond that, we also see occupational trends in terms of the kinds of jobs, the kind of workspace individuals are looking for. Our book provides several graphs and distributions to demonstrate the diversity we see in workforce. And here you can see the greater representation in the workforce of people aged 65 to 75 and then 75 and older. Again, there are smaller percentages in terms of the majority of the workforce who's between 25 and 54, but their percentage is increasing, and we anticipate people staying in the workforce longer for a variety of reasons. We also see greater diversity in terms of where workers are coming from and their ethnic background. And our book talks a lot about the diversity we have seen in the past and we anticipate seeing going forward. Here again is the hourly compensation cost of manufacturing U.S. dollars as a percentage of cost in the United States. And so compensation for different people from different places around the world. Another interesting topic to think about is technology and how technology is going to affect the environment in which HR is working in. Historically, we've seen factories and mass production being the most common types of workforces. But again, today we see a greater diversity in the kind of workforce and kind of work area that's available and the kind of work area that's very common. More oftentimes, employees are very concerned about upskilling and developing more skills. Relatedly, we also see as the organization's goals change, we may see that they need new skills, and then HR may be tasked with, the organization may be tasked with deciding whether they need to hire new employees with those skills and let go of current employees or retrain employees in the skills that are needed. So technology affects in terms of the skills we need from employees. Technology also will affect in terms of automation in the workforce. We'll talk about that down the road. There's also issues related to privacy concerns and the potential misuse of social media by employees. We'll talk a little bit later on about whether or not employers should use social media accounts like Facebook and LinkedIn when making hiring decisions or promotion decisions about employees. Again, technology generally broadens access to the labor market for employees. They can find jobs easier and be found easier. And also, we'll talk a little bit about how it enables a virtual workforce, that more and more we see distributed workforces across broad areas. And technology enables people who live far from each other to work together. course, one driving force in terms of the environmental influences is globalization, and we're increasingly seeing that country boundaries are being blurred in business activities. More and more, we see international joint ventures between organizations in different countries and maybe from different parts of the world. Relatedly, we also see increasing challenges as those companies work together and bring people with different values and backgrounds together into a single company. Again, their cultural backgrounds being different may lead to cross-cultural miscommunication between people from different backgrounds. On the other hand, we also see organizations increasingly offshoring, again, sending work that normally or previously was done by the organization within a country to another country to be done. So specific tasks or specific organizational concerns that can be met in another country at a cheaper rate is increasingly a common practice. Oops. We'll talk a little bit about different trade zones. Again, we're seeing movement away from countries having borders into more into countries making alliances between countries into trade zones. Like the United States, for example, has a North American Free Trade Agreement that set in place a number of policies regulating trade between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And of course, there's numerous other trade zones around the world that create alliances across countries and across borders. The European Union, for example, created a single market with the removal of trade barriers for a number of countries in Europe. Not all, but most of them. However, of course, the European Union has been in the papers a lot recently with the movement of the UK out of the EU, and other countries considering the same thing. EU, as it is now, allows for free movement for people across borders. So if you're from one country and visiting another, you don't need to worry about a visa. It also has a common currency. That means that one currency is available for use in several different European countries. And that's benefited some countries, but maybe hasn't been as beneficial for other ones. It's allowed, again, movement between countries very much easier. But it's very controversial right now. Again, as the UK prepares to depart the European Union and other countries consider it as well, the fate of the EU is somewhat uncertain. We'll also talk about the need for organizations to act in ethical and socially responsible ways. And so increasingly we're seeing companies and management being held accountable for their ethical behavior. If not by law enforcement agencies, then by their customers, who oftentimes can boycott an organization if they find out the organization has done something they find ethically reprehensible. Corporate policies and procedures are thought to spell out ethical behavior. And the new need for not only ethical behavior, but also socially responsible behavior is moving ethics onto a whole new level. When we ask individuals why they committed acts that we consider to be unethical, most of the time they'll say they're following the boss's directives. Most of the time people act in ways we feel are unethical because they feel like they're following instructions, either directly from the boss or from obligations and goals they were given that were overly aggressive. Beyond that, we ask people why they engage in unethical behavior at work. They'll say it's because they're helping the organization to survive, or trying to meet pressures from a weekly schedule, schedules they're faced, or just wanting to be a team player. Again, there's some argument that people commit unethical actions at work not because they're unethical people, but because they feel external pressure, or they're just trying to be part of the team. How organizations go about making sure those behaviors are rare or never happen is a very interesting and complicated topic. Nike, for example, was accused of unethical and irresponsible behavior in terms of their manufacturing practices. And so they released a very comprehensive code of conduct that they've modified over time. A book replicates it here. And please take a look at it. Take a moment to look over the Nike code of conduct that employees are given when they're employed there. The last issue we'll get into, and we'll talk more about this in Chapter 3, are regulatory issues. And specifically, I want you to focus on the Civil Rights Act, the American with Disabilities Act, OSHA, and the Civil Rights Act of 1992. We'll talk about those issues more when we reach Chapter 3.